As we all know, in a world as terrifying as ours, the biggest horror is the gender binary. Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. And this continues to show that I don't do well with surrealism. But anyway, today I am reviewing Listen, The Sounds of Fear from NineStar Press. This one was actually a little bit different for me. Usually when I get a short story collection of any kind, it's either all done by the same author and sent to me by that author, or it is done by a press or an editor and is sent to me by the press or editor. But in this case, it was actually sent to me by a specific author within it. And can you do that? Can you just send out your own author copies if you're in an anthology? Asking for me, I got a thing coming out. Regardless, I really enjoyed this one. It is all about horror stories written by trans or non-binary authors, and all of them focus to some extent on a sound of some kind. In some of the stories, it's the inciting incident, it's the big centerpiece of the horror. In other cases, it's kind of just a side note, but they all function as something scary within the story, and I really liked that idea. The struggle I had was, yes, the surrealism, only in some of the stories. Some of the stories are super literal, and it's like, here's the thing, here's the reason behind the sound, and here's what they have to do or what they're up against, like whatever. And then in other cases, I've read enough surrealism and magical realism that I've learned that I'm just not going to get it. I don't knock off stars for it if I don't understand it, because my brain is very literal. And so usually what happens is I just go, those words look cool together. I'm sure there's a meaning there, and I'm sure someone else will get it, and I move on. And there were some stories like that where I was like, okay. There was one story where the creepy sound that was referenced at the end, the protagonist was like, I know what that sound is. And then I was like, wait, am I supposed to know what that sound is? And I rewrote the story, like, just in case something would click. Nothing did. I have no idea what that sound was supposed to be. So anyway, there was a little bit of tonal whiplash, which you can kind of sometimes expect with horror anthologies or any short story anthologies, because when you have different authors writing, you can get a lot of different perspectives. And I think part of my issue with this one, with the tonal whiplash, was you had probably the most lighthearted of all of the stories that almost read more like a cozy mystery than horror. But it was right smack dab next to one of the most horrific psychological thriller, surrealism, terrifying, all of the content warnings story. So I think as far as curation goes, I would have put, I don't know, maybe do it more on like a gradient so that you're kind of like easing yourself into the horror. I'm not sure, but regardless, that was a little bit of a whiplash. Now, I have decided to focus on 3 separate short stories that stood out to me for their themes or their concepts. Obviously, every short story in here could be worthy of discussion, but people already struggle to watch reviews if they're like 15 minutes or less. I really can't afford to make this thing a half hour long. So let's jump in. The first story I want to highlight is Her Little Joke by, I think the author's name is Oila Gray. Those how to pronounce sites are never super accurate, but that's what I got. So this is the very spoopy, cozy mystery part where, yes, there's something creepy. There's a creepy scratching noise coming from the bottom of this well that no one understands, and it's begun to take over the town, and Mauve Maeve is determined to find out what it is. But, like, it's also very cutesy in the way that it's presented. Now, it's called a blog. Like, you're supposed to be ingesting this media through the blog. But I got really confused because maybe this is a cross-cultural thing in my experience, a blog is something purely written to be read. But then as the story goes on, I realized that basically the words I was reading was supposed to be the representation of audio content. That it was supposed to be like almost like a podcast or something similar. And I don't know if that's like, if in the UK that's what a podcast, like a blog, is either written or audio, but that confused me for the longest time in this story. I had to go back and be like, okay, is this something people are listening to? But it was really cutesy because they had like all those cozy mystery tropes, like the cat, the adorably clumsy protagonist, her gigantic crush on her boss, who, you know, it's a queer story, so it's adorable. And this is one of those stories where it's a little bit more clear cut as to what the sound is. But there's, you know, a mystery of a couple from the past that ran away. And it's just, I could see the cover for this cozy mystery. And obviously it has a cat on it because I'm pretty sure it's a law that all cozy mysteries have to have cats on the cover. But it was just very cute, even when it got a little bit scarier. And in general, I really liked the levity of it. Again, I wish it hadn't been quite right up next to one of the darkest in the anthology. But in and of itself, it was adorable, and I need to see those two in their own cozy murder mystery series. The second short story that I wanted to highlight is Holy Water by A.R. Vale, and not just because A.R. Vale is the author that sent me the collection, but rather I really, really liked the analogy of gender dysphoria in the story. Now, obviously, trans people deserve to see themselves in stories where they are out and proud and living their best life, but I've also discovered that I really like stories that delve into both the realization of the dysphoria and also what the dysphoria feels like, because as I mentioned before, I am very cis. I tried she/they on for a second. Gender critical people tell me that because of the hormones and everything, really I should be, but it didn't stick. However, I liked this story because the narrative around the protagonist, T, is all masculine. It's he, him pronouns, although if I remember correctly, I believe in this story, T notes that he does not necessarily feel like he would be a boy, but that he, him just fits. But the characters around T refer to him in this very girl way. And it made for an interesting juxtaposition between his brain, his mind, him as he knew himself versus how everyone else was treating him. And I really liked that aspect. I also really liked the use of sound as a mechanic when the protagonist is hard of hearing or deaf, because in the story, the dripping noise is heard constantly, but T hears it even when his hearing aids are out. And that was like this added tension of he's hearing sounds he literally shouldn't physically be able to hear, and it comes up with like all of these added implications of like the supernatural aspect of this sound, and is it just in your brain? Like, I love that added aspect of horror in that he literally shouldn't be hearing any of these sounds. I do believe I'm not sure exactly the distinction between hard of hearing and deaf, but I'm really interested in more speculative fiction with disabled characters. I actually did an entire list of speculative genre fiction with neurodivergent or disabled characters within it, featured prominently within it, and I've actually been lightly reminding one of my favorite queer authors that he made the mistake of promising me a deaf or hard of hearing romance, and I'm not letting him forget it. So I really liked that aspect and how that went into having a horror story surrounded on sound. And in general, I swear it's not just because the author was the one that sent this to me, mostly because I forget names. I don't put the name of the author in my notes. I just put the name of the short story as I go. So I forgot that this was actually A.R. Vales. But 10 out of 10, one of my favorites. And the last story that I want to highlight is literally the last story, Haunt by Alex Silver. This is all about a trans man who has just been gifted his childhood home after the death of his father, and he wants to go back, clean it out, and sell it. But, of course, we have a lot of deep feelings wrapped up in this house. There's a lot of mentions of transphobia and grief and not necessarily overt child abuse, but very, very complicated childhood upbringings. And I really liked how complex this story was in reference to what it is like to grieve in this way, because our protagonist is caught in, like, there are some good memories with his family in this house, but there's way more bad ones, and there's that kind of the grief is as much for the death of the people that once lived in the house as much as it is for what could have been and for what death has prevented. You know, now that his entire family is dead, there's no hope of them ever accepting him for who he is. And that one was pretty hard hitting. I've mentioned before in other reviews, but for me, it's more impactful to actually show the long-term grief than it is to just show a character's death. If a character dies, the story will usually end shortly after and you move on. But when you have a story that's focused so much on grief and you're forced to sit with it and the long-term aspects of it, it hits a lot harder. And this one did a fantastic job of that. I also liked that the relationship between the protagonist and his husband was shown as very healthy, but not universally perfect. Bert gets a tiny bit patronizing at times, and you kind of want to hit him for suggesting certain things. But regardless, I really liked this one for how heavy it dealt into certain themes. The mechanic of sound as being a focal point of the horror wasn't as overt, but I did still like it an absolute ton. And there we have it, my review of Listen from NineStar Press. I gave this 5 stars. Like I mentioned before, I don't hold it against a book if I don't understand the surrealism. At this point, there's only one author that I will accept magical realism from, because I've just accepted that my brain doesn't vibe with it. But I really did like all of the different takes on the prompt. Everything had, queer aspects. Everything had sound aspects, but it was all taken wildly differently. And I really appreciated the sheer breadth of variety there was. I was actually, after every short story, they give you like the author's social media information. And I was actually like following each author as I went through, which was fun. But in general, if you like queer horror or surreal horror, this is definitely going to be right up your alley. October is right around the corner. It's a great pick for that. And in general, I'll have to be on the lookout for more of these authors. This isn't the first book I've reviewed from NineStar Press. I can think of at least one, maybe 2 others. So this is a great press in general to check out, especially if you want queer work. And in general, I've never had to write the phrase pizza cannibalism in my notes before, but I'm kind of happy it's there now. Now, if you are an indie author and you would like a review something like this one, you can contact me. I will have all of that information down in the description below. Please be sure to read through my review policy. It answers a lot of questions and saves us a lot of time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.